We had a lady in our, of course, Beltsville, our Bowie office, um, like come into our branch manager's office at like 2 o'clock and say, I have to run. And she literally told our manager she shit her pants. And she was like, I had a mess in my pants. And we didn't really believe it because this lady used to miss stuff all the time. So she had a string of crazy car accident, and then we
Right.
see her car the next day and it's completely fixed. But her brother-in-law is really good with cars, so he fixed it. So we never really bought it, but she never came back. This lady never came back. That was her last day. She said she shit her pants. And
You can't.
we
You
used
can't.
to always joke whenever someone would screw up, I'd be like, go sniff her chair. You got to go sniff her chair. That's your punishment. Go sniff the shit chair. There was a joke like no one went in that office for months because we had enough other offices, but that chair became the diarrhea chair that you had to sniff if you screwed up.
It's kind of like the Ed Rooney and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. You only got 4 grandparents. You can only use the dead grandmother so many times. But what I've learned with diarrhea is people rarely probe.
That's amazing. That's amazing. If grandma burns a batch of cookies and asks you how they taste, you choke them down, you smile, and you say, delicious, grandma. And if your boss asks you why your eyes are so red at an early morning meeting, you don't tell him that you closed the bar out the night before. There are just some things that you don't need to be completely honest about. And in this episode, we have a blast in talking about the times at work where it's perfectly acceptable to lie. Hope you enjoy this as much as we enjoyed making this tongue-in-cheek episode. If you like our podcast, hit subscribe and follow along. And if you're one of our longtime listeners and you have not given us a 5-star review, please take the time to do it. It means a lot to us. And I'm not lying.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Matthews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God on the air.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch.
You lying bastard. Today it all comes out. Our viewers are going to see you for who you really are.
There is no doubt. There is no doubt.
We are talking about lying on this episode today, which I feel like Frank has to do on a regular basis with me to protect my ego. So he's going to have a lot of material.
Clearly, it's a shame we don't have B-roll and we didn't record the prep on this one because we've been laughing the whole time.
We had to cut a lot of shit out. So if at the end of this episode you think we're bad guys, you should have seen the stuff we left on the cutting room floor that we lie about. Oh dear God.
Mean, what do you lie about? What we're going to present.
Our lives would be ruined if we had recorded the 45 minutes before this show is actually recorded. So we're talking about acceptable reasons to lie. And I want to just start by saying, I don't care how much you go to church. I don't care how saintly you think you are. You might think you're the most honest goddamn person in the world. The truth is you lie so much more than you think you do at work. It's ridiculous. And I'm hoping to open up your eyes to that and help you feel better about it by the end of this. One thing that sparked me to think about it, a friend of mine, I was just thinking about this the other day, he invested in a company. So, and he asked my advice about it after he had sent the check, right? So you're not really asking someone's advice after you're 100% committed and there's no plan B, right? You're already kind of all the way in.
You're already in. You're in.
He invested in a company that it was a vodka company, but this vodka company made brown vodka. So as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I would never buy brown vodka that would look like it was bad, dirty vodka. Like it wasn't distilled. Vodka is clear for a reason. This is what people want. But he had all these reasons why he did it. And instead of destroying him and saying, that's the goddamn stupidest idea I ever thought, you got to get your money back, you're going to lose all $50,000. I nodded him and I thought, wow, it's really interesting. That's got a chance. And it was a lie. But he had just invested $50,000 And what good was it for me to tell him that you might as well have lit that shit on fire? You're not getting it back. There was no good of doing that to him at that point. So I said, hey, man, that's got, maybe that's got a chance. It was a flat out lie, but I felt like the alternative was really mean spirited if I'd have done it. Let him find that out in 2 years that he lost his money.
So it's so funny that you said that. You basically use word for word what I wrote. In my notes, I put, no good will come of this. When you lie in your career or anything else, it's because no good will come of it. And it comes with wisdom and age. And we've talked many, many, many times. I've got 2 kids under the age of 3. My son, who's 3, says some of the craziest shit. And one of my favorite people on the planet, one of Ian and I's favorite people on the planet, was my granddad. He would always say things that would just put you on blast. Like, hey, Gramps, how are you? He's like, good. Where'd you come from? The gym. Oh, yeah. What, you work out? Yeah, I try and work out a lot. I try and stay in shape. And his quote to me was, I've seen you fitter. So like, he did not care if any good would come to it. He was just an honesty broker, but he was 86 and he didn't give a damn. And he had no chips left on the table for anybody to care. But in the work environment,
and let's talk about granddad. So there's a small niche of people, including myself and Nickel and your family and some in your family, who really loved granddad. But it was a small circle because granddad didn't give a shit about offending a lot of people. So his circle was kind of small. And he also put a pretty low ceiling on his career by approaching life that way. Right. Like, you do have some huge admirers when you are just radically honest about everything. Some people just find it refreshing, but the vast majority of people are totally freaked out about it. And it is a little career limiting.
And I think you stumbled ass backwards into something. We had a conversation about radical candor, radical honesty. And we talked about the guy who wrote the book, Radical Honesty. And literally, you can't find it. It's ranked 654,000th on Amazon's books. Like, literally, Mein Kampf is higher ranked than this guy's book because of the fact that he just has absolutely no couth. And if you have no couth, you are limited. So everyone lies every day. Does this dress make me look fat? Think twice before you answer that honestly.
100%, especially if you don't look good in a dress yourself, which Frank does not look good in a dress.
Does this dress make me look fat? No, eyesight does.
No, your face does. So we're going to go through our reasons, perfectly acceptable reasons to lie at work. So the first one is when being honest doesn't help your career, which that's about as blunt as you can be. There are feelings that you're trying to pay attention to at work. There are politics to play. There are some things you just don't say at work if you care about your career. And being radically candid is going to get you radically kicked out the door. There are some things you just do. If you don't respect your boss, you can't look him or her in the eyes and say, I don't respect you. You can't. You'll never, unless you just want to leave, and that's great. Good job, hard ass. You just found yourself out the door. Now, if you found something better, great. If you don't respect their decisions, if you think the company's direction is just completely wrong, you don't buy into the CEO's big initiative, which that's a career killer. When I was a GE, I've said this many times, I think Six Sigma is just the biggest bunch of bullshit I've ever seen. But Jack Welch dedicated 3 chapters of his famous leadership book to Six Sigma. I wasn't about to be like, raise my hand at me and be like, this is just a bunch of dumbass statistical jibber jabber. I would be like, this is changing the game. I would just go along with it because it didn't serve me to like that. If I wanted to work at GE, and I did, and there were plenty of other things I liked about the company, crushing Jack Welch's #1 initiative was not going to be great for my career.
So I think I think this is kind of generational too. So right now, what you hear about millennials is how hard they are to manage and how different they are from the last generation or the 2 generations ago, like our generation. And when we came to work, what we did is we kind of shut our mouths, we grinned and bear it, and we just went along with it. I think what you see generationally now is kids are less willing to put up with that. So if you're on the other side of this and you are a company owner like I am, or a leader of people, you've got to put an agenda together that people can get behind. and you have to understand these things. So you have to juxtapose it with, what do people think? So I'll give an example of something. I've been a part of initiatives that I thought were dog shit, terrible, bad ideas, don't like them. And the way that I engender myself to the staff is I pull a small group in and say, clearly, this is the direction we're going in. We can't, does anyone want to quit? And nobody would say yes. So, okay, we got to sell this publicly, but internally, we all know this is crap. So how are we going to interpret what we're being told? How do we still succeed and find the metrics that we need to do a good job so we all get our bonus and we all get what we're here for, which is compensation, and do it in a way that we can buy into it? And we don't have to, it's kind of like a splinter cell. We have a small splinter cell. We just don't make it terribly public, and we motivate around this point that we think is crap, but we find a silver lining or something that we're going to drive towards. And that, to me, is the way that you can take something that's a bad message, not make it terribly public, but make it public enough where you get enough support where you can still do the good job, still get the compensation, still be honest a little bit with yourself, and kind of get through it.
And I think what I'm saying here on this first point, I don't think either of us were yes men in our career, or ever have been. I would certainly push back on initiative, but there are some things where you can just see there's too much money invested in this. There's too much momentum. I'm not going to change it by saying how stupid I think it is over and over. All I'm going to do is make some people pissed. So I got to try to make the best of this. That doesn't mean don't push back. That doesn't mean don't respectfully say, I'm not so sure about this, but you've got to be smart about it. And at some point, understand a decision's in stone. I got to get on board with it or leave the company, find something else to do.
So this is critical. Where are you in the pecking order? Did you just graduate college? Are you an intern? Are you new? Are you in the bottom of the barrel? Are you just in the company for less than 90 days? You do not have the clout to start running your mouth about something you fully don't understand. So what you do, if you think something is off base or not in line with what you want it to look like, I think it's smart to do this quietly and do it with, hey, talk to a couple of your peers who are in reasonably the same boat as you and have that conversation. If you're higher up in the organization, like Ian and I were in our last stops in corporations, or I am now, if we don't like something, what I do is I get a group of people and we talk about it at the top level and say, is this what we want? Is this not what we want? But you got to know where you are in the pecking order, depending on what you're going to say and how you're going to say it, because it could be a career killer. Like if you came out and you've been here for 90 days and you're like, Six Sigma's stupid, you're going to get your head lopped off. Where if you're a 3-decade employee who's producing at the very top end, and you're like, you quietly question these things, it's very different.
So Frank's company is doing an initiative that I think is pretty cool. So the whole company is investing in community service, planting trees, doing a number of different things. It's a cool initiative. It would be a very different thing if one of Frank's top executives, Eddie Angelo, someone came to him and said, hey, everyone's really busy. I think we need to kind of back off this for 6 months or not do this, versus someone he just hired 3 months ago coming up to Frank and saying, this whole community service thing is a bunch of self-serving crap. That person's out. Like Frank wouldn't have patience for it. But if one of your guys that have been with you for 5 years came and said, Frank, we got to stop doing this for a year. Like it's not the time. Everyone's too busy with other things. Frank would listen to it because the pecking order is a little different and they've earned the right to go attack something that big.
So Nassim Taleb wrote a book called The Black Swan. And The Black Swan, what he starts talking about in The Black Swan, the first 30 pages is all about 9/11. And what he talks about 9/11 is if on 9/10/2001, the FAA required the doors that are in every cockpit now, 9/11 never happens and it goes away. But it's really hard to quantify things that don't happen. It's very hard to see it, and people don't put a lot of stock in it because it didn't happen, so it isn't real. There's no really visceral thing there. So if you want to not lie or create a culture where people don't lie, there needs to be honesty, and that needs to be brokered. I'm going to use the exact same example Ian just talked about. Community service. We were at a fulcrum. We set a goal. We were behind the goal. it was really hard at the beginning of the year to do community service events because COVID was still involved and we couldn't do things publicly. People weren't vaccinated yet. You couldn't do group things. It was really hard. So sitting in July, we're like 35% of the goal. And I asked my senior leaders, like, do we need to change this goal? And the senior leaders said, let's survey the group. Let's do an honest survey with the group and see what they want to do. And younger people love community service. They love giving back. They love sustainability. And we did a vote, and the super majority were like, we want to make this. It's important to us. But people aren't lying, because I went to the top. The top kind of did a straw poll. The straw poll said, do this publicly. Publicly, we created the poll, and people were like, let's do it. Let's figure this shit. But what we have is we have a culture where people can speak honestly, and we know to do it from the top down or from the bottom up, both ways. So it prevents people. It's kind of like preventing 9/11 by having that door. So you don't see that stuff, but you can foster a culture of honesty with moves. Big companies like GE, it's easy to either not have an honest culture or for the real message to be missed, because Jack Welch is 15 rungs above Ian when this is all happening with Six Sigma. It gets filtered down. It's a game of telephone with kids. So there's more room for there to be an opportunity to not be honest.
Number 2, covering for a teammate. So this is the snitches get stitches point of when it's okay to lie. I'm sure this happened to you a lot of times, Frank, where someone underneath you made a decision that wasn't a good decision, and it pissed off your boss.
Yep.
And they were like, who made this decision? And I had more cachet in the company. I had more chips on the table with my boss. So I would say that was my decision, even though it wasn't. I was just learning about it because I knew my boss already didn't really like that person who worked for me, but I did, and I hadn't built them up enough yet. And I didn't want them to be scared of failure. So I would say, that's all on me. I made that decision knowing it really wouldn't hurt my career because I was in a much better standing than the person underneath me that screwed up. I've done that a lot of times where I've just said, oh, that's on me. I made that decision. And then I would talk to that person and be like, you got to cover these things with me. Like, I didn't know you were doing that, because I wanted to cover for them and buy them some time. Now, that's not saying I'm this altruistic guy. That's still a little selfish, because I knew that person had potential and I knew they could do great things for me and my team at some point. They just didn't have the cachet yet to screw up for someone higher up. So I would take the hit.
It's also good management and good leadership. Like this morning, like literally 2 hours ago, I had 2 issues arise with a very important employee, 2 mistakes on 2 separate items. And we were on a public phone call with an outsider. And the answer was, that's my fault. That's on me. Blame me. Tell him it's my fault. Frank screwed up. I didn't screw up. I'm not the one who did it, but it doesn't matter. The whole goal here is I could fire this person and start over. That's not going to do any good. So we have to have a private conversation about how we need to present from the inside out, and that can be handled. But the leadership piece is, this is what leadership is. Like I've said this on this podcast, I say this all the time. I've gotten to a level in my life where I get credit for nothing. All I do is get blame. That's it. That is my job. I am the one who takes the blame, because others are allowed to accomplish. And when something bad happens, it's like, blame him and just take it as a pincushion. So this is how you cover and grow. And now what happens behind closed doors? Do we both agree we have a problem? Do we both see a solution to fix this going forward? Do we have something here that we can learn from, grow from? Will we make this mistake again? And hopefully the answer is no, or bring it to my attention first. Like these are things that you do, but this is how you build loyalty. You build honesty.
I love it.
Build things so people don't have to lie.
Yeah. Yeah. I would also say, if you're in a sales job, I had to do this many times. If you're in a sales job and someone screws up on your internal team that's not customer facing, someone misses a deadline, someone forgets to call someone puts the wrong date in for a delivery. I think it always is in your best interest to tell the customer that's on you as the salesperson. I didn't do a good enough job communicating this. That's on me. I wasn't following up enough. And the reason why I think it behooves you to cover for a teammate and tell a lie and say it was your fault is you want the customer always to believe that you as the salesperson are in complete control. So when things go right, when things go wrong, you're in control. So they're dealing with a decision maker, someone who can get things done because ultimately they trusted you to give an order to. And so they should trust that when things don't go well, it's also on you as well. So I was always a big fan of no matter what engineer under me at GE screwed up, or if someone on my team messed up a loan or something, I was never big into throwing that person under the bus with a customer. I always would say, that's my fault. Even if I was just learning of it, I'd say, that's on me. You should blame me. But what that also does, Frank, is that engenders loyalty from the people that are on your team, that you
Correct.
wouldn't let them get, that would make them want to get my deals. Whenever a new sale will come up, a project manager will raise their hands, I'll take it. Is that Ian's? Because I always protected them from the wrath of the customer, which I should do because I'm getting paid commission. They weren't.
So everything is a moving economy, right? There's always a sliding scale. Things are going. You're in one of two positions. You're in a position where you need grace, or you're in the position where you get grace, or you give the grace. So it's a continuum. So when you're new, someone needs to cover you for your ass. But when you're experienced, you may need to cover for somebody else. That's how this goes. And let's use an example. You're a new manager and you have a new employee. It's your job to cover for their ass when they screw up. But if you're a new manager and that person screws up, it's your senior manager's job to protect you to upstairs. That's how this all works in a continuum. And it's going on constantly, and done properly. The lies can be mitigated. The responsibility gets pushed to the right person. Because if someone gets, like we use the NFL, we did a Tom Brady podcast the last time, right? So in the NFL, what happens in a lot of instances is the quarterback gets blamed. But is it really the quarterback's fault, or is it the organization's fault, or the team's fault, or they can't draft an offensive line? But so it's, in some instances, it's hard to protect people, but in corporations, it's usually pretty easy to do so if you're being honest and looking at where does the grace need to be delivered.
I'll leave that one with a funny example. So I was on campus at Purdue recruiting with my buddy Macaulay, and we were with our boss, and we went out the night before with our boss. Our boss peeled off early, and of course, Ian stayed out way too late, later than John. John stayed out with me pretty late, but I went next level and didn't show up, and I was supposed to be there for college recruiting in the morning. So John's covering for me, and every time our boss comes out from an interview, he's like, "Where's Ian?" And every time John had like a new, oh, he went to get a newspaper. Oh, he's getting us coffees and bagels. And he would sprint off and try to get a hold of me again. So I didn't roll up until like 10:30. But by now, he's already lied, like the cocks crowed 3 times. He's already lied like multiple times to our boss to cover for me. And I come in, my eyes are all red. And my boss like comes up, like sniffing my breath. He's like, "Did you just roll up?" And I'm like, yeah, I did. I'm right out of the gate. I'm like, I slept in. I was out too late. And John is looking at me like, "I'm going to kill you. I just lied 3 times for your ass." But the cool part of the story is our boss actually loved it because we were new teammates, and Mac and I weren't, we're best buds now, but we weren't at the time. We were just peers. And he loved the fact that we were becoming a team enough where he wouldn't snitch on a teammate. He thought it was actually really cool. He was pissed at me, obviously, but John didn't get in trouble because Bob thought that was good teamwork, that he was covering for someone who obviously screwed up in a pretty big way.
Yeah, like I remember, this is funny. Like this, I just thought of this while we were talking about this. I was on a recruiting trip, and it was somebody that I didn't know. And we were both the recruiters for the company. And I had to use the bathroom. Like I had to go terribly, but there was no stall. It was the place we were at didn't have a stall. So he's like, "I'll just wait for you. I'll stand up front." And I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, if somebody comes in, I'll just tell them you need a minute, and I'll kind of play the doorman. I go, are you serious? He goes, yeah. This guy and I are still friends 25 years later. We'd met 3 days earlier. And this is something that most normal people wouldn't do for you. Like literally watch out so you could take a dump in peace in a place without a stall door. Like that's pretty high praise. And he and I both jumped in, like we got along. We'd had a couple of cocktails. We were pretty friendly. We were similarly aged. But like I looked at that, I was like, that's pretty cool. This guy did something that, you know what I mean? And it's like right off the bat.
I love it. So number 3, when it's not the boss's business, when it's not their damn business. So I think this falls into politics, religion. If your boss, if you have strong views on gun control and your boss is a very big gun advocate, it's probably not the best place. Yeah, I mean, you don't need to go out and say I own 7 guns and tell that lie, but you probably don't want to be as strident about your opinions in that place, especially if you know they feel differently. I think social life is a big one. For a long time, I was a very young manager, so I was manager at 24, I think, and my boss would ask, "What'd you do over the weekend?" Well, 24-year-old who's single in Chicago over the weekend is doing nothing but drinking. I wouldn't tell him that. I'd be like, it was a pretty relaxed weekend, actually. I watched the Cubs and went for a couple of runs. I'd tell him like the couple of things that seemed like a 50-year-old might do on a weekend and leave out the hundreds of things I did that were, debaucherous in nature. Because what's the point of telling them everything I did over the weekend? There was no point of doing that. That did not serve me. So I would lie and be like, it was a really laid back weekend, when really I was in Vegas at Rehab Sunday the night before and I could barely stand.
So this is in my 20s, this is years ago. And there was a woman that I had a major crush on. And it was in the early part of like wanting to date her. And we didn't really know each other. And I was talking to her and I'm like, she's like, hey, I got to go for a run. I got some stuff to do. I go, okay, cool. So she goes, we hang up, we talk a day or two later. And like we started dating. And like 6 months later, I asked her, I go, remember that night you told me that you need to run? Like, we've been dating for 6 months now. Like, you don't run. She's like, I know. I had a date. I need to get off the phone with you, but I wanted you to want to date me. So I didn't want to tell you I was going on a date. I wanted to tell you I was going on a run. So you think I was fit and hot.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
It's perfect. It's perfect. Yes. It's like, there's no good will come of this. Everyone dates. We're not dating yet. Like, it's a little white lie. In your career, you need little white lies. Like every once in a while, it's probably good. Like I was telling you in this story.
Frank, I consider you among the most honest dudes I've ever met in my entire life. And yeah, you tell white lies all the friggin' time. But I consider you one of the most honest guys I've ever been around. Like, if it's important and it's serious, your integrity always sticks out. But you're like no one else. You're like, you're gonna protect people's feelings and do the right thing. You're gonna tell some white lies.
Yes. We can move on.
So number 4, you don't want to socialize with your boss or coworkers. This is absolutely a time where you should lie. 100%. The thing to say is not, I spent 9 hours with you a-holes all day, and I can't imagine spending another 2 hours with you at happy hour. That sounds horrible. Or my personal life is way more important than this company. That's a good time to just slip a little. Like, I love your story about running. That's a good, God, I would love to go to that happy hour. That sounds really good. But, my son has a baseball game, or, I would love to go to that Redskins game with you on Sunday, boss, but my mom's in town, actually. Like, I almost never socialized personally with my manager or people in the office. I would do it a little bit, but for the most part, I always came up with a polite little white lie rather than telling them I just don't really want to go do that.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. It's funny because I've gotten more honest with this as I've gotten older. Like, at first, I thought it was cool to be around the boss when I was young. And as I've gotten older, like I don't have really a boss or anybody now, but I think of it from the other perspective of like hanging out with people and like third parties in a lot of instances. Like I'm in a different spot in my life. Like I talk about different things, I do different things, I have different goals, different pursuits. It doesn't mean I'm right, you're wrong, or vice versa. It's just different. So you think of polite ways to give yourself a little bit of distance. And what I think is this, like if you're just a psychopath or something, they're probably going to figure it out. But if you can do the job, you're good at what you do, you breed loyalty, you've got good camaraderie with teammates, and you can get all that done inside of the hours of the job, that's great. But you can also distance yourself. What I've noticed is what tends to happen is there's usually factions inside of a business. And the best thing is like the admin staff in my company, they all hang out. They're all friends. They do things together on the weekends. They don't do a lot of stuff with me. I don't get invited. It doesn't hurt my feelings. We're just in different spots. So that's okay too. But how do you do it? How do you, like what I hear, there's two things there's something I hear and there's two ways to react to it. Hey, so-and-so and I got together this weekend. We got our kids together. We went to a park. We had a great time. Okay. I wasn't invited. Does that hurt my feelings? Or am I thrilled that people inside of the company are getting along well enough to do things socially outside? If you're a selfish, short-minded person, you're going to think they didn't invite me, fuck them. But the other side of it is they didn't invite me. That's incredible. They invited each other. That's really cool. We're building a culture. So those are the things that you can look at and I think are really positive.
In The Office, the show The Office, Michael is always asking Jim to go out for beers, go out, and it's just a running gag for 10 seasons. Jim always has something like, oh, you know what, that's and it's always a little white lie, and Michael's always trying to catch him in the white lie because he just wants to hang out with Jim so bad, but Jim doesn't want to hang out with him. He sees him all day, and he does it because he doesn't want to hurt his feelings and say, Michael, I don't want to hang out with you. And that's okay. You tell little ones like that. And I think this is also a pecking order thing. I think the higher up you go, the more honest you can be of, nah, I don't do that stuff anymore. I don't, like I got a family, I got stuff I got to get home to. You just tell the truth. You get a little tired. When you're younger and you're trying to work your way up the chain, I think the expectation is you do more of that socializing, that you go out, that you do anything you can to be seen, to be heard, to build camaraderie. So my recommendation would be, if you absolutely can, you should try to go do all the extracurricular stuff. If your career matters, if you want to move up. But if there's just something that's personal going on in your life and you really don't want to be there, opt out, find a way to say it wherever will accept it easiest.
So before we move off of this point, I think this is worth talking about. As I get older and older, one-off experiences mean less and less. And what I mean by that is I'm less impressionable. It's hard to surprise me. Events aren't as important as they were. It's just, I don't get as excited about stuff. I'm nearly 50 years old and I've seen it, I've done it, I felt it, I've had those experiences. But when you're younger, things matter. A one-off event, doing things, building camaraderie, those things actually do matter. So the right balance, especially if you're really fun and funny and quirky and can like you can increase your brand by picking the right spots to do things and to show your incredibleness. And what I'm driving at is memories do help form things. Like extracurriculars, when you see someone step up and do things incredible, put currency into your name and it's real. So if you do have a desire to advance, picking the right things to go to are sensible, showing that you're diverse, showing that you are, you're dynamic, help. And managers in rooms with closed doors talk about, did you see what this person did at the charitable event? Did you see the organization? Did you see these things? So you don't have to do all of them, but every once in a while when you flash, it really can help you. So picking and choosing strategically is really smart here.
If you get, I think put another way is if you're climbing the ladder and you get offered a chance to spend personal time with a decision maker, pretty silly to pass it up. find ways to do it, especially if you can show your personality. People, the people that get promoted, it's people promoting people that they like spending time with. And if you can prove you're someone who is fun to spend time with outside of the office as well as in the office, you're going to move up faster. But once you get to a place where you're satisfied, you don't have to go to that stuff anymore.
Here's another example. So we were doing something. It was myself, a realtor, one of my managers, and a relatively new person. And we asked them to do something inside of the work framework. Like, hey, we're doing a call. It's going to be on Zoom. You should log in. We think you'll get something out of this. The person did a few things. Number one, showed up on time, took notes, asked questions, was engaged, was very obvious that they weren't looking at their phone or checking email. They were involved in the conversation. And within 15 minutes of the conversation ending, an email was sent. Thank you for the invite. This is what I learned. This is how I'm going to implement it. Thanks again. That's incredible. Like, those are the things that this was not a social event. This was a work event, but that's the type of stuff that is memorable to your manager and it's textbook on how to do it right.
Number 5, in a negotiation. So by nature, I mean, salespeople get a bad rep, but by nature, you are not going to negotiate with someone by telling them the God honest truth about everything right out of the gate. I mean, it's a game of poker. You're hiding some information. No one ever starts a negotiation by saying, I would like to get $10,000, but if I'm being honest, the absolute drop dead I would take is 2,000. No one's ever said that that's any good at all in sales, right? Like, you'd be fired pretty soon if you led every conversation with the lowest price your company would be willing to cut. But if we're being honest here, that, if you're taking a black or white approach of honesty in a negotiation, why not put all of your cards 100% on the table? Well, because you'd be a lousy business person if you did that. And anyone who's ever negotiated anything is withholding information, is not sharing everything 100%. That's part of the game of negotiation.
So when I was young and impressionable, there was a manager who we worked with.
Now you're old and impressionable. I still find you a very impressionable person.
That's great. I'm glad. But one of the guys that we used to have as a senior level manager, who was, many rungs removed from me and above me, used to say, every great salesperson has a little larceny in their heart. It doesn't mean they're thieves. It doesn't mean they're bad people, but they are capable of a little bit of lying or a little bit of positioning or a little bit of posturing to sell. So that's the way it works. It's the way it works in relationships. It's the way it works in my marriage, the way it works with my kids. It's the way it works with managers. It's shit. Ian and I do it with each other. Like, there's posturing. Is there anything really good that's going to come of this honesty? Let's just move on to the next point. And that's life. So another example is this. So I was a huge fan of Hamilton, and it changed Broadway. I saw an interview with the person who invented it, came up with it, wrote it, Lin-Manuel Miranda. And he was writing, and he talked to somebody who had multiple hits on Broadway. And he goes, let me ask you a question. Are you writing to write, or are you writing to write a play? He goes, write a play. So what that means is leave a lot of stuff on the editing room floor. Don't deal with it. Don't negotiate it. Don't talk about it. Don't dedicate time to it, because it doesn't get you on Broadway. When Ian and I do deals, we leave a lot of stuff out. We hit on the major highlights. We don't do anything unethical, but is this confusing? Is this really going to help the point? Is this going to drive at what we want to drive at? And if the answer is no, edit it. And I think that that's kind of an overview of all of this with negotiating, especially.
So number 6, protecting someone's feelings who says something stupid. Frank,
as an aside,
this was your agenda item, so I'm going to let you go ahead and lead this one. Your exact words on that agenda line item.
Like Ian says shit all the time, I think, dumb. I just nod. Good point.
You just nod. Our loyal listeners can see Frank's always just nodding when I'm talking. Like, okay.
That's crap. Let's move on. Number 7. But In all seriousness, this happens all the time. I have a 3-year-old. He's constantly saying things that are nuts. Like he's just yeah, like blabbering. I encourage him. I say, okay, buddy, what else? What else are you saying? Like, just get him to come out with it. In a lot of instances, people will say things because of immaturity or inexperience. And what I think of is I can put this person on blast. But I was 25 once, and I said things that 45-year-olds probably thought that's really dumb, or that's really inexperienced, or that just shows this person's lack of worldliness. And they were gracious to me. So what I might do, instead of putting them on blast, sometimes I'll put them on blast because it's fun and because I'm human and it happens. But the other time is, that's an interesting perspective. Why do you have it? Talk a little bit about it. But be mindful of this. Like if you are just full of all kinds of crazy ideas that just come off that other people will think is dumb, read the room and kind of ratchet it back. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself being an outsider pretty fast.
Yeah. Whenever a manager says that's a great idea, but have you thought of this? They don't really think it was a great idea. They actually think it was a very stupid idea, but they're being nice to you. And they don't think it's stupid. They think it's ignorant. I think it's lacking experience when someone says something like that to you. So, I mean, it's happened to me plenty of times in my career where I came up with an idea that hundreds of other people had thought of that wasn't a good idea before me. And a manager was nice enough to say, love that thought, even though they don't love the thought. Here's some more perspective on something like that. Right. And I think a lot of lying is just about protecting other people's feelings in general, Frank. Just protecting them from not telling them the God honest truth because it's just going to be hurtful to tell them the truth.
Right. And it's not part of the greater good. You're not getting anywhere better. You're just going to be a dick to be a dick. Like you don't need to dig in on the point. Like we've all seen it when someone just being a jerk to be a jerk. And it's so obvious and it's so painful. Yeah. And like sometimes you watch it and it can be kind of entertaining, but then it gets to a point where it's just grating and it's just like you tune it out because it's just so over the top. But as a good leader and a good manager, you redirect it, or you ask other questions, or you pull someone aside and say, hey, in this meeting, you kind of went a bit overboard. Like as your leader, I would think that these are conversations we should have kind of off the record or behind closed doors or not with the whole group. But that's good leadership. But yes, a lot of these things happen. You just nod, okay, moving on.
And just on. So Frank just mentioned the Hamilton thing. That was like one of the funnest weekends of my life. So it was my 40th birthday, and Frank surprised me and got tickets to Hamilton at a time where it was really hard to get Hamilton tickets. They were expensive as hell. If I'm being honest, I didn't really like Hamilton. I had an amazing night. I had a lot of fun. But when Frank asked me, and Frank loves Hamilton, he'd been listening to the soundtrack for like months. He knew every song. He knew every word of the song. I was bored as hell. I didn't really like the show much, but I had a lot of fun with my friends and I was acting like a crazy man. But afterward, when he's like, what'd you think? I'm like, that's one of the best shows I ever saw. I didn't believe it, but I didn't feel like getting into it with him right then because it would have hurt his feelings and he just spent a lot of money and I was having such a great weekend. But what was the point of telling him I kind of think Hamilton's overrated? I didn't say that. I was like, that was amazing, Frank. I love it just like you did, because there was no point in telling him the truth about, God, I'm glad that's over. So now we can go to a bar. What was the point of doing that? He put so much into it. And the truth was, I focused on like, this is one of the best weekends I've ever had. I'm having so much fun with my friends. I'm having a great time. But to attack something he loved at that moment, there was no point. So I didn't. I said it was
there was something else too. I don't know if you remember this, but we walked in and I did my best to get good seats. Like Ian's particular, and I wanted to have good seats. And we walked in and the seats were not as good as I anticipated. And the first thing Ian said to me, it's not a bad seat in the house, Frankie. He knew they sucked. I knew they sucked. We weren't happy.
3 rows from the back wall. I was like, man, we got the good ones. These are great. I can see the whole stage. This is perfect.
But it's like the overall weekend and getting into an argument after Hamilton about Thor being drunk and like,
great.
It was a blast, but it was like, that's it.
Great. So number 7, when you're job hunting. So let's be just as straight as we can here. Both the interviewer and the interviewee are lying in an interview. that there are lots of little lies that you're telling, nothing egregious, but both sides are kind of withholding information.
Yep.
And I think on a number of things with job hunting, you don't need to tell your boss you're looking for a job. You don't need to tell them, hey, I'm looking, because some companies just suck. They'll cut you. They'll get rid of you right there as soon as you say you're looking. You don't have to look out for anyone but yourself. You don't need to tell, let's say you were fired from a job. I can say this, between Frank and I, we've interviewed over a couple thousand people. We talked about this before this episode. Neither of us can remember someone outright saying that company fired me because I screwed up and wasn't performing. But the truth is 50% of people we've interviewed probably have been fired. And we always ask questions, why'd you leave this company? Why'd you leave this company? No one ever says, well, that company actually fired me. It's a funny story. I forgot to sign a few documents and the company lost a couple $1 million. Totally on me. No one's ever done that. No one's ever said I was fired. So I think when you're job hunting, you have to kind of withhold some information, because if you're completely candid about everything, you're not getting a job.
Some of it falls into the category of self-preservation. One of my friends has a great quote: self-preservation is undefeated. And it's the truth. Like, whenever push comes to shove, people usually protect themselves first. It's a survival instinct that goes back 100,000 years. So that's where you're at. Like, I can't flagellate myself with this. And it's funny because, like, I've told some embarrassing stories or some very critical things of myself in interviews. And sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't. And what I've come up with is a narrative that includes other stories that maybe aren't as damning, but are equally as effective in the interview. It's kind of like editing. It's kind of like the Hamilton thing. Leave it on the cutting room floor. It's not interview worthy. But hey, I made a couple of mistakes at this company, but let me tell you this: I made these mistakes, but this is what I've learned, and this is what I've done. Like, that's how you pivot it from something bad to something good. And that's something that an interviewer will understand. Like, if you were the most incredible employee who never made a mistake, you wouldn't be in my office interviewing. You'd be the CEO of that other company. Like, there's an honesty that comes into you're interviewing for this particular position. We all kind of know that.
So number 8 along these lines is when you give your notice, when you leave a company. And I think this one falls under just taking the high road. So Tom Brady leaves the New England Patriots after 20 years, and people ask him why. And he says, it was just time for a change. I wanted to see if I could do this in a different system. He says a bunch of high level stuff. Well, now a book's coming out where all of the people around Brady are spilling the beans that he wasn't getting along with Belichick, didn't feel respected, didn't feel like they gave him enough input. None of it came out of Brady's mouth, because if it would have, if him trashing his organization, his owner, his coach of 20 years where he had 6 Super Bowl rings, if all that would have come out, he would have seemed like a pretentious ass that wasn't, that it wouldn't have looked good for him. So, and he knew that. So he just said it was time for a change, and he took the high road. And I think that's always the best way to go when you leave a company, is just say, had a lot of good times here. I learned so much. I'm really grateful. It's just time for a change. There's no need to get into, even if that's not completely true, there's no need to go trash your boss, because most people leave for a boss. But if you're smart, you're not telling everyone the boss is terrible as you're out the door. Like, there's no reason to do it. It just makes you seem petty.
So I'm a 2 separate things. One, Brady was probably somewhat miserable when he was in New England. Belichick's tough to deal with. They had salary cap constraints. There was a bunch of problems. Who the hell wants to live in Massachusetts and play in a winter league in the middle of it's awful. There's a bunch of bad things. But as many bad things as were happening, this team drafted him in the 6th round where no one else did. If they don't draft him, he's selling insurance. So there's some gratitude. That's number 1. In addition to that, when you stop and look at it, it's like, okay, in my 2nd year in the league, we won a Super Bowl. By my 8th year in the league, we've won 3. That makes me elite right off the bat. So if this sucks, which it might, what are the trade-offs? And in 20 years of keeping my mouth shut, I got 6. Now, honesty and assessment comes down to, it makes sense to leave because there's other teams. I'm a free agent. I'm willing to work for less than I can demand. I have some goals that are kind of outlandish where I get it. There's some reality of people don't want a 43-year-old quarterback. So he went somewhere that was ready to win and he imparted himself in it and he made a great decision for him. And the thing he did is he kept it quiet. This is the other side of it that we don't really talk about a lot, but people will often run their mouths when there's success. They'll spike the football. They'll be boastful. Did you see that? I kicked your ass. Things along those lines. To me, it falls in the same category. No good will come of that. Like, that won't age well. So bitching and complaining while you're leaving, or bitching and complaining or celebrating or making someone else feel bad in a victory are related to me. And both of them have very little long-term currency. And it just shows a lack of judgment and a lack of decision-making and forward thinking. Celebrate with grace when you win. Celebrate with grace when you lose. Mitigate these things. Don't create bulletin board material. And if you do that, your longevity, your career, you're going to have a better long-term product because you're thinking mindfully.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Number 9, if you are a manager and some company calls you as a reference check for a former employee who maybe wasn't a great employee, but they're a good person. So this one's always a very hard one for me. I get tons of calls of reference, you manager for 20 years. There's a lot of people that put your name down as a reference. And sometimes I'm a little surprised that people will put me down as a reference because it didn't end well. I've had people that I've fired put me as a reference check. And in those cases, I'm very careful about, I don't want to lie. I don't gush about someone who wasn't a great employee, but they're a good person, but I will share their strengths. And I will say, here's a role where I think this person would really fit in. If you're looking for someone to do this, this, and this, I think they could do that really well. So I'll try to highlight strengths, even though it might not have ended well for them, and try to just avoid talking about some of the nastier things. A lot of companies, their policy for this reason is to say, we don't do reference checks. Just makes it simple. That's a kind of a lie. Whenever someone says, I just don't do reference checks, that just means they don't want to talk about that person. They'd rather just pass and plead the fifth. Because NVR and GE both had that policy of, we don't do reference checks. But I did hundreds of reference checks when I worked for both companies. If someone called and I liked you, I would give a good reference check for you. I didn't care what NVR's stated policy was. I was going to give a reference check and say something nice because you're my friend now. You're not an employee. You're my friend and I'm trying to help you.
So I'm going to go a few different directions with this. First, if you're going to put someone on your resume as a reference, or you're going to give someone as a reference, the first thing you need to do is check with the person who's the reference. Ian has said earlier that, he'd fired someone and they just put him on. That's really being stupid. Like, hey, Ian, is it okay if I put you down as a reference? Would you say good things if someone called? And I would answer that question quite honestly. I'm probably not the best person for you to put down. But maybe you should talk to somebody else in the company that you worked with. No, I'm dead serious. Like,
I know it just sounds hilarious. It's such an awkward conversation.
It is, but you're better off having that conversation with me and knowing I'm not going to do you justice than putting me down blindly and just hoping. That's number one. So when I was in my 20s, I built a house. And I used this company, this hardwood company. They did my first house and they did an incredible job. And they did a different type of flooring than we did it when I worked at Ryan Homes. So it wasn't a subcontractor I worked with a lot. On the second house, I was building this really expensive house. I was stressed out about it and they did a terrible job. Terrible, like absolutely terrible, to a point where like it went legal. Like they didn't perform. It cost me extra $10,000. It was bad. 3 people called me from that hardwood company and asked me for a reference. And I finally called the owner and I said, what the hell are you doing? Like, you treated me like crap and you've got customers calling me. Like, and he was a jerk about it. Now the calls ended, but like, I did not give a good reference there. here's another side of this.
I think that's a different one though. I would never lie if I just, the only time I'm going to lie is if you're just a really good person and you're not the greatest performer. I'm going to try to help you in some way. But I think there's another side to that, Frank. There's the part that gets awkward for me is, especially if it's a friend calling on a reference. In that case, I never lie. If it's someone that I know, that I care about, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to just say, look, here's the good and the bad. Here's the strengths. Here's the positives. I'd be careful putting them in this kind of position. I think they do fine in this position. Like when you ask me about someone and you've hired some people that I've known, I've said strengths, weaknesses, here's probably where they'll do better. Here's where they won't. So it's a little different when it's, you're talking to someone that you know and that you have to see.
So let's wrap it up this way with references. Be mindful of who you put down as a reference. Be honest about it. Think about it. Be strategic. In the instance that I talked about with the hardwood company, they didn't think that they weren't mindful of the fact that I had a terrible experience and they wrote me down. But I see employees do this too. Like people get caught with theft. Like we've called references and they're like, no, we fired them because they stole something. Like you put that as a reference, like be mindful, like someone may actually call one of these people.
Yeah.
Understand that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And if you were just a terrible employee and someone calls me who knows me and asks, I'm going to say that. If it's someone random that calls me about a terrible employee, I'll say it's 5-on-4 group stated policy that we don't do reference checks.
Exactly.
Next one is saying you're sick when you're really hungover. I think that one goes without saying. You don't say I'm hungover and skip work. You just got to say, hey, I got a little cold going on here. I got my nose a little plugged up. I don't want to give this to everyone in the office. I don't think we need to expand on that too much, do we, Frank?
No, I think we should go right to 13 and wrap this sucker up.
That one makes me a little sad because I don't miss work for being hungover anymore. It reminds me of the good old days when I used to have to call in sick. It was always a little obvious when you always did it on Fridays, though. Like
I loved it. Like we were doing leadership essentials and you're like, hey guys, I'm a little hungover. I woke up 12 minutes ago. The call started at noon. You're like, yeah, I had a big night with Dordo last night. We went to MGM Live.
I'm a little more honest about it these days. When you own your own company, you can be honest about it.
It can be.
What are you going to do?
I want to get into 13.
Okay. So 13 is avoiding unnecessary meetings, which is absolutely my favorite reason for lying. And I do it unabashedly because I hate meetings. So here are my favorite things to do. I like to pick up a fake phone conversation from a customer and say this is a customer and then just get up and leave, or turn my Zoom video off. Be like, guys, I got to take this customer. That 100% of the time will get you off of anything or any meeting. No manager, no matter how senior you are, is going to say you can't talk to that customer. CEO won't say. CEO will look like an ass if he says you hang that phone up right now and get back in my meeting. So for me, customer is a get out of crappy meetings free card every single time, and I love it. I also love to do the hard stop. If a meeting's going too long, I'll say I had a hard stop, especially if it's a half hour, or Frank's about to do it to me right now because it's coming up on noon. It's 11:55. So he's like, I got a hard stop. Probably a lie. He's probably doesn't have anything going on. He hasn't done shit all week because he's been homesick.
I'm hungover.
So I got to take this call. I'm booked at that time. If someone tries to put a meeting in, I'll say I'm booked at that. I'm already double booked. Can you handle that one for me? These are little ones.
I want to jump in because I have a hard stop. So the best one I've ever heard to avoid a meeting is my wife. So my wife is a professor at the University of Richmond, and there was orientation. She had just met these women an hour and a half earlier. The dean was going through something and they're like walking around campus. And she tells these women that she's now really good friends with, but she had just met. She's like, hey, I'm leaving. And they're like, you can't leave. She's like, yeah, I'm going to leave. They're like, what are you doing? She's like, well, I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to work out and I got a date later. But if anybody asks, just tell them I had diarrhea. And they all look at her and go, are you serious? Like, yeah, just tell them I had diarrhea. I'm going to leave. And she fucking left. She peaced out.
Well, I actually have a diarrhea story. We had a lady in our, of course, Beltsville, our buoy office, like come into our branch manager's office at like 2 o'clock and say, I have to run. And she literally told our manager she shit her pants. And she was like, I had a mess in my pants. And we didn't really believe it because this lady used to miss stuff all the time. So she had a string of crazy car accident, and then we see her car the next day and it's completely fixed. But her brother-in-law is really good with cars, so he fixed it. So we never really bought it, but she never came back. This lady never came back. That was her last day. She said she shit her pants. And we used to always joke whenever someone would screw up, I'd be like, go sniff her chair. You got to go sniff her chair. That's your punishment. Go sniff the shit chair. There was a joke, like no one went in that office for months because we had enough other offices, but that chair became the diarrhea chair that you had to sniff if you screwed up.
It's kind of like the Ed Rooney and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. You only got 4 grandparents. You can only use the dead grandmother so many times. But what I've learned with diarrhea is people rarely probe.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So, hey, we've had fun with this. If you enjoyed this, go give us a 5-star review. If you think it sucked, but you're friends with me and Frank, we'd ask you to lie and write a 5-star review with some nice comments, even though you think it was stupid. Maybe Frank says some things that offended you. You think he's kind of ruining the show. Don't write that. It'll hurt his feelings. Give equal praise. Normally, most of you in the comment section are saying like Ian's kind of carrying the show. Don't do that anymore. Say like Ian and Frank make a great partnership. They're both equally intelligent. Don't rip on Frank. It hurts his feelings. Protect his feelings.
Ian, I don't know if I'm being truthful when I say that this has been a lot of fun.
I'm going to think about it the rest of the day. See you, Frankie.
See you.